Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
So we are back for another Extension Calling, and we are in September.
I know. When I was setting up the date for this recording, I was just like, wait, how is it already September? I had to turn my calendar just to be able to see the date.
And it's not only September, but it is both of our fair weeks, kind of.
Yeah, so, yeah, I know.
I figured we'd explain this a little bit. Right. It is the Belmont County Fair. Okay.
Yes. So, which is your fair.
You're the one who has the unique situation here.
Oh, because I have to be special because, we live in this little skinny, tiny panhandle thing. And so back in the 1920s, West Virginia sold our fair to West Alexander, Pennsylvania, with the stipulation that our kids in Brooke and Ohio County would always be able to show at the West Alexander Fair, which is right across the state line. It's closer than some places inside this panhandle. So the West Alexander Fair is starting this weekend with weigh-in on Sunday and all the shows coming up. So for all you kids that are showing, good luck to you. For all you parents, good luck to you too.
For all you 4-H volunteers, good luck to you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you said that. Volunteers. Let me give a shout out to anyone who volunteers for anything. You guys are so important and you make things happen. Without the volunteers that work the fairs and the volunteers that do our outreach with 4-H and Master Gardeners and just all you guys are super awesome, and I wanted to say thank you for the time you put into not only making your lives better, but also improving the lives of everyone around you. So thank you for the time you and the parts of yourself that you give to this volunteer work. It really does matter, and we are so thankful for you.
And I will also add that from a volunteer standpoint, volunteer work is generally really good quality. The work that comes out of people that enjoy volunteering is just top notch. Whether it's like something Rotary, 4-H, Master Gardeners, it's all great work and it all makes a huge difference.
Yes, it does. So thank you again. And we're really happy to have you. And if you're interested in becoming a volunteer, please reach out to your local extension office and let them know you heard about volunteer opportunities on our show and look into what it takes to become a Master Gardener or a 4-H volunteer. We always need more help. The more people that are out there volunteering, the less overwhelming it can feel, because sometimes when there's only a few people that are showing up to do stuff, it gets hard and it's not as much fun. Part of the joy of volunteering is that you get to hang out with people who like the same things that you do. And so you make new friends, you have great opportunities to go out and see things and learn things. And it's just a great opportunity overall. So if you do have some time and you're tired of binge watching shows, or you finally are getting ready to retire and you don't want your skills to atrophy, or you just need to get out of the house, look into volunteering regardless of what it's for. There are so many needs out there for volunteers. We really hope that you'll take that step and come out and join other people that like the same thing you do.
That's true. Great way to make friends, stay active, and just enjoy life a little bit more.
That's right. And speaking of enjoying life, Dan was telling me about a listener who had called him. And Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about this listener?
Yeah. So this listener comes from Charlottesville area in Virginia. Bought some land, got some sheep and goats. Just a beginning farmer wanting to know best way to approach it. He has been involved with his extension office. Says he picks it up on the radio all the way in Virginia. And because of his focus right now on small ruminants, he asked if we would do a show on parasite control in sheep and goat, some sustainable practices and different ways to look at it and how he should approach the problem or at least look at the issue in general. So here we go, right, Karen?
That's right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about sustainable parasite control in sheep and goats. So your small ruminant animals, which are really popular, especially for beginning farmers, because it's not as much of an investment for as you would need for a cow, and you also have a lower space requirement. So as our farm sizes shrink, I think we're going to start seeing more and more sheep and goat production. And for these animals, you can be raising them for fiber, for meat, for milk. There's a lot of good opportunities with these animals. And so it's really important, though, to know what you're getting into before you really get in deep. And parasite control is one of those challenges. I know if you're in any of the farming groups online, perhaps you've been seeing some pictures of what happens when you overuse copper to treat parasite issues in the obomasum, or the digestive system, part of the digestive system of these ruminants. And you get this really nasty gray area where the tissue is actually dyed from exposure to copper. So you can't just like take, oh, well, copper is organic and it's natural, so it's fine, I'll just give it to my animals. There are very specific limits to the amount of copper you can have available. And if you have high copper availability in your feed or your maybe even your soils due to,
if you use a lot of copper products in, let's say, fruit production,
overspray.
let's say you're renovating, and you're going from fruit production to pasture, and you want small ruminants on there.
Or
just take a look, do a soil test. You'll get that answer.
That's a really good thing to talk about too, though, because a lot of our smaller farms are multi-purpose farms. And so you may be doing some grazing underneath your fruit trees. I know it's very popular in the olive groves. So when you have sheep and fruit production in the same field, you definitely need to watch those copper applications or fungicide applications and potential buildup in the soil. It's a great point, Dan.
Wow, way to take us to the Mediterranean. I just got a really nice image in my head, so that was that was good.
I'm glad I could brighten your morning.
And one of the things I did in a little bit of prep for the show was I was looking at our local goat and lamb market, really just more so the goat market, looking at some trends in Southeast Ohio from 2016 to 2023. They published the sales reports and everything, but you're looking at goats and all the way from the caldos to like the heavy weathers, the heavy kids that are 70 pounds and up, and the light kids that are a little bit low. They did not break 200 very often before 2016, and really wasn't too long that I'm looking here. And 17, 18, 19, they broke $200 an animal. Well, this is for like the heavy kids specifically, so 70 pounds and up. And in 2019, you're looking at 250. In 21, they broke 300. So 22, 23 report, if I'm looking at it, it's fairly close to 300. Very profitable numbers. I'll say that with parasite control, having the distinction from 70 pounds and up to 70 pounds or 69 pounds and down could make a really big difference economically on how your goats get marketed for sale. There's obviously a market for it. And I don't know these numbers specifically, but people talk about if you're crunching the numbers per acre, you can get a lot more small ruminants in a pasture field. And whether you're talking cattle to goats, obviously there's a huge size difference. But when you start looking at the numbers as far as how many animals you get per acre, goats and lambs can be very competitive with cattle. And then also if you're talking about handling facilities, the smaller handling facilities are a little bit easier, a little bit cheaper, well, significantly cheaper. They don't have to be as sturdy. You don't have to use like the heavy duty steel for really strong animal like a cow or a calf or a bull, right? Can't even compare that. So very profitable way to do things, and people are taking advantage of it. And small ruminants do have their own issues, and parasites are one of them. When we talk about parasites, they're actually gastrointestinal nematodes. So they're internal parasite worms, nematodes, and they have a direct life cycle where the animals will intake them orally, like just grazing, and that nematode will then attach itself to the animal, sequester nutrients from the animal as they feed, so that the sheep or the goat in this case does not gain as much because they have high parasite loads, just like a tapeworm, for instance. Not to say they're the same thing, but they kind of act similarly.
But it's still internal parasite. Yeah.
But then they would lay eggs, they'll defecate, and their feces are lined with eggs, and the next small ruminant will graze and uptake those eggs. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that.
I was gonna say you skipped a step there.
The eggs hatch, and then they go from larva 1 to larva 2 to larva 3, which are the mature larvae. Those then get ingested by a different animal, and the life cycle continues.
Right.
And the problem is when you have a high parasite loads, you don't get the gains that you want. And then those profitable numbers that we just talked about really won't be there as prevalent as they should.
Right. The way the larvae gets back into the animal is directly through the digestive tract, right? So the larvae that are in the third stage are actually going to wiggle their way up onto the grasses that are in the field where the infected animal defecated. So they pooped, the larvae lived in the poop for a little while, then they wiggled over to a plant, found their way up a little bit onto the plant, and they're going to be super happy on those lower parts where they're protected from direct sun and there's a higher moisture content. And so as we go through this conversation today, think about your pasture. If you are raising small ruminants, then think about how you manage your pasture and how that could impact it. But before we get too far into that, I want to go over some of the common symptoms of these animals that have parasites in them or that are heavily infested with these parasites. So there's three main ones that affect our local sheep and goats. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the scientific name because no one uses that name out in the field. And that's what we're all about, is what you all can use. And so you have the barber pole worm, the brown stomach worm, and the bankrupt worm or the black scour worm. And I like black scour because it really properly describes the impact that this parasite has on the animal. So common signs of these parasites are, of course, weakness, loss of weight. Like Dan was saying earlier, they don't gain as much, but they also don't eat as much. They're not as hungry. They're going to be losing their body condition score or decreasing their body condition scores.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have bristly hair, so it's a little drier and it breaks a little more easily, and it just doesn't look as nice, right? And then they have something called submandibular edema, right? That basically just means the area underneath their jawbone will fill with fluid and get swollen. And then they also, of course, have anemia, where they have lost some of their red blood cells. The iron-containing capacity of those blood cells has decreased, and their blood isn't as able to do what it needs to do to deliver oxygen to the muscles of the animal. And so to go back to that black scour worm, one of the things you'll see with that is as that infestation increases, they'll have diarrhea, but the diarrhea will become darker and almost black. So that's where it gets that name, black scour worm. The other pests, the barber pole worm and the brown stomach worm, you'll also have diarrhea, but it won't be as dark, right? And so one of the things that you're going to monitor is that anemia. And if you can find a FAMACHA, FAMACHA workshop near you, you should definitely take it, because it is one of the primary ways to monitor and support or maintain health of the animals in the face of these parasites.
Right. It's a great screening tool. It's obviously not the only thing you can do. There's all those symptoms as well, but it does give you an extra tool to utilize. And those FAMACHA cards, that basically it's a color system that you're looking at blood flow in the animal, so that if the animal is anemic due to parasite load, you'll be able to see it underneath their eyelids. the cards are controlled. So the way to get one of these cards is to take a FAMACHA course from a professional. There is a certification standard to teach it. They do a great job, and you will get that card. You'll get the education, and you'll be able to implement it from an integrated pest management standpoint, so that you're not just doing one thing. And that's just one more tool that you get. But when you go to these FAMACHA courses, you also get different ways to reduce parasite load, whether that's grazing practices, utilizing various types of dewormers so that you're not doing one thing all the time. And we'll talk about that in a second. And it's just like with weed control, parasite control, the more different ways you tackle it, the better control you're going to get. And in this case, shooting for 100% might not be achievable, but just reducing that load by 50%, even up to 75%, let's say, you're still going to benefit, because you'll see that rate of gain go up, and that rate of gain might go up to where that might be able to tip the economic scales for you, and you'll be a lot more profitable. So let's go into a little bit of management process and how you can deal with these gastrointestinal nematodes, also known as parasites for small ruminants. I guess one of the most common misconceptions here with parasite control for small ruminants is you treat the entire population with a dewormer of some type. Well, some of the issues that can happen with that is that you're going to have resistant parasites already there, right? So if you treat the entire herd with one product and you kill everything that's susceptible, the remaining resistant parasites that are there are then going to reproduce. Their numbers are going to start going up again if you don't manage anything else except for that. And what you'll end up happening is, after a few generations of reproduction for that nematode, which doesn't take very long, you're going to have basically a pool of resistant nematodes to that medication that you thought you were trying to clean up the problem. And now you have one less tool in your toolbox because everything's resistant. So one of the ways to get around that is to just kind of, screen your animals, make sure that you're not doing all the animals with that one medication, because then if they're more resistant to it, it's not really affecting it. And if you just treat 50% of the herd, so it's like having refuge. We talk about refuge rows and BT corn, let's say. This is the same kind of thing. You have refuge in your flock, so that those numbers are coming down. You're going to have a mix of resistant parasites with susceptible parasites, and you're able to knock down those numbers without really skewing the resistant scale all the way over.
Right. And so the main takeaway I want everyone listening to get here is you do not treat the entire herd. You only treat the animals that are showing signs of a parasite load that is impacting them negatively. So when Dan was talking about the refugia, that's basically you are protecting a portion of the nematode population from being exposed to the chemicals that we use to protect our animals. So that portion of the population is still going to have a lot of different genetics to it. And that is going to mean that those genetics are still mixing in with the couple of nematodes that survive your deworming treatment. And if that's the only thing that's left, that's what you're going to be breeding. And we don't want to breed resistant nematodes.
Yeah.
So we're leaving part of our population, even if some of the sheep have those nematodes in them, we're not treating all of them. We're only going to treat the ones that have symptoms of decline associated with the nematode load.
Yeah, I know that sounds that you have to understand that with a lot of insects and bacteria and even microscopic parasites, there is a load capacity in the environment. And by having a mixture of susceptible and resistant bugs in there, you're still able to use certain products. So I'm looking at this fact sheet from Mississippi, and they have different types of dewormers, so they list 3 that'll work with sheep and goats. I know sometimes there's a labeling difference there, but in this case for sheep, they're saying that there's 3 that work fairly well. Safeguard, Panicur, which is the same type, and then you have things like Levizole, and then you have the ivermectins, which are the third type. One, it's good to have a rotation, but two, you don't want, you only have three in this case. And other than that, you're going to have to get extra labeled use from your vet to manage this. And the important thing is you don't want to lose one of these three products that are really going to help you reduce that parasite load. So just knowing how to handle them, and with the refugia that Karen was talking about, it's just really important to make sure that you're not knocking everything back down so that when the population comes back, it's all resistant, because that's one less thing like that's there.
Right. And you also want to think about the entire biome of your pasture field, right? You want to think about more than just that one little parasite. One of the studies that we're doing right now is we are researching the impact of deworming medications on dung beetles. Now, we're specifically focused on cattle pasture fields, but a lot of the medications are similar. So what we're trying to determine is if the deworming medicines we're using are actually decreasing our dung beetle populations and reducing the ability of nature to help manage and monitor the moisture levels and parasite loads of manures, because dung beetles will go in, and there are some that will actually, their larvae will eat the other larvae that's in the manure. Other ones will tear apart the manure so that it dries more quickly and it's not as suitable of a habitat for parasites. So there's a lot of dung beetles out there that are doing a lot of different things. I'm really looking forward to getting this research out to the public once we have our final data. But these are things to think about. So when you're thinking about your alternatives to just using
the
deworming treatment, yeah, you can look at how you graze your animals. Are you properly rotating them to allow the larvae time to mature and then die before you put those animals back into that pasture? So we're looking at the lifespan of your L3s, your third level larvae, is about 21 days in tropical conditions where it's hot and lots of sunlight, but 6 or more months in temperate conditions, which is where we are in the Appalachian mountain chains.
Exactly. So what do? We know that these larvae like fecal matter. They like to be low. So, when we talk about paddock rotation and rest periods, we're really talking about not to overgraze. You don't want the sheep getting in there where the parasite load is high.
Down low on that grass, yeah.
Avoiding overgrazing is really a great way to make sure that they're not going down there and just re-ingesting those L3 larvae. That could be the resistant ones, right? And that's how you tie it back to the previous point of not treating the entire herd and then having nothing but resistant parasites in there. So you still want to be able to use the medication on the animals that are more severely infected, but you also want to make sure that you are not re-inoculating very aggressively either. So avoid that overgrazing. Try to keep your low density not to the point where they're just taking everything from the top all the way to the ground. Another thing that you can do is just have different types of forages, having those forbs in there, things that have all the secondary metabolites like tannins and saponins and, secondary metabolites that have, we talk about tannins with wines, they're kind of beneficial for us, but even for the sheep and the goat, these chemicals are designed to keep herbivores from really just tearing up these plants. So when an animal ingests them, they will also help with these nematodes inside the goats and the sheep.
Right. And when you're looking at some of these plants, just to give people a little bit more of a on the ground thing to look for, things like chicory. Chicory is something that we call a weed, and we don't particularly want it, but it actually has some of these anthelmintic
secondary metabolites.
Yeah, it has some of those chemical properties that help to fight internally these parasites and can help to kill them off. So bird's foot trefoil is another one, as is sanfuin. So If you want to look out there for these types of plants, reach out to your local extension office and we can get you a plant listing. But just in general, weeds, not having only grasses in your field. Now, this is especially important for goats because they don't eat grass really anyway. But having those pastures that maybe aren't perfect isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, the diversity is always good because you're going to have different things thrive at different times. And, but right, for sheep and goat especially, Lespedeza is another real popular one that we talk about that's kind of weedy, but apparently does show some signs of parasite control in a pasture setting. But also having different species. I know goat and sheep are different species, but they do share that parasite. But following a field with cattle, so remember we were talking about not killing everything that's left is going to be resistant. Well, you add another animal that's completely different that don't share those parasites. Then what happens is you inoculate with things that don't affect the other species. They reduce the load. They will ingest some of the sheep and goat type parasites that we were talking about. The ones that infect the cattle typically don't infect the sheep. So by grazing in series of livestock, if you have that capacity, that's another great way to kind of reduce that L3 larvae and kind of clean up a little bit so that you are going to be more successful when you follow it up with different species like that.
Right. And you look at how nature developed these animals, your sheep are going to prefer those more immature parts of the plant at the very tips, whereas your cattle prefer the more mature leaves. And so it's almost like this was a planned thing, right? So think about multi-species grazing, look into some of the aspects around that. And of course, as always, reach out to your local extension office if you have any questions. And we will be putting a link to this really great fact sheet for Mississippi State in the show notes. And so if you want to know more about sustainable parasite control for sheep and goats, reach out to us and we'll try to get you on your right path. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.